Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the last OCM for the year. So I would like to declare this meeting open at 6:03. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners. The town of Bassendean acknowledges the past, present and traditional owners of the land on which we gather to conduct this meeting, and it pays its respects to their elders, both past and present. Announcements of the presiding person without discussion. As it's the last OCM for the year, I'd like to wish a good festive period for all at the town and all community members that have come along this evening. So thank you for your attendance and wishing you a good Christmas. Moving on to attendances, apologies and applications for leave of absence. Do I have any? Are there any? Yes, I might just note that unfortunately our good Mayor Hamilton and Councillor Ames have taken ill with a seasonal flu and are unable to attend in person, but such is their dedication that they're attending online, notwithstanding their state of health. So I thank them for being in attendance this evening. Declarations of interest. Do any councillors have a declaration relating to any item on the agenda? I'll take that as no. Presentations or deputations. Now I understand that 3 people had sought to give a deputation this evening. Of those, 2 have been granted that by the CEO, so we will in due course hear from Katharina Wolf and Sam, from Katharina Wolf. The other is merely a statement, but there will be a statement from Sam James. The other request for a deputation was made by Kate Davies. Now, what has occurred in the first instance, she has sought to give a deputation. The CEO has determined that that was inappropriate, having regard to the content and its alignment to the agenda item. So I might just, because we will then put this to a vote so that council can decide whether they wish to countermand the decision of or the interim preliminary decision of the CEO. So I might just allow the CEO to elaborate on why that particular deputation doesn't align with the item.
Thanks, Mayor. The regs actually say that I don't have the power to refuse it. What it says is, if I have concerns about the validity of it relating to the item, then I refer it to council, and council should vote tonight on whether to listen to the deputation. So I don't have any power to veto any deputation. Let's be clear about that during the regs. My reading of the item is it relates not directly to the item. It talks about the coding of the area being R60 and through LPS 11 into the Town Centre Master Plan. Those decisions have been made. The government is now considering LPS 11, so we cannot undo that at tonight's meeting. So happy for that community to express their concerns in other ways, and they've had that opportunity with LPS 11, but it's not really the format in my mind to do that tonight relating to 12.2. And given that deputations at a council meeting need to be related directly to the item in question that you're voting on to assist you in making decisions, I do not think the deputation tonight assists you in the decision in front of you. Having said that, that is up to you to vote on.
So as the CEO has indicated, he has formed a preliminary view, but that decision is not the CEO's to make. So that does rest with council. Unless there are any questions, perhaps councillors may have. Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Acting Mayor. My question would be, does this bring any new information or any information that's not already covered by the local planning scheme that we passed?
My understanding is, from speaking with the CEO, that it relates to LPS 11 as opposed to the heritage overlay, and so can be distinguished from the other deputation, which I believe addresses the issues. Did any other councillor have a question? Otherwise, Councillor Wilding, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Is there a portion of the deputation that's relevant to 12.2, or is it entirely focused on the zoning?
I'll defer to the CEO on that.
in my mind, there's loose references, but it doesn't actually go to the point of dealing with the item that you're making a decision on tonight. So I would say no.
Were there any further questions, or Councillor John?
What was the voting requirement? Simple majority or complete?
I believe it
Simple majority.
is a simple majority, yes. And the councillors online, you've heard that? I'll take that. Thank you. So what I'm inclined to do is to, having regard to what the CEO has told us, and having regard to the item in question, relating not to LPS 11 but to the heritage overlay, to put this matter to the vote. So I'll frame it in terms of those councillors that, notwithstanding the content or proposed content of the deputation, would like to hear that deputation regardless. If people are in favour of that, to say that to vote in favour. So those that wish to hear the deputation, raise your hand. Oh, sorry. I'll move her and second. So look, I'm happy to move that, Councillor Wilding to second, and we'll resume that vote. So those councillors that, notwithstanding the concerns as to relevance, that wish to hear the deputation, please raise your hand. Okay. So that has passed 5-2. Unless Councillor Ames, you were in favour and I didn't see your hand.
No, that's correct. I did not vote in favour, but as the vote has panned out, we'll be hearing another deputation. Thank you.
Yes. So that yes, 5 in favour. Katharina, I'd like to invite you to the table to give you a deputation. Please have a seat and make yourself comfortable.
There you go. Right. My name is Katharina Wolf. I reside at number 4 Newstead Avenue, and I'd like to make a deputation on behalf of the residents of Newstead Avenue, the successful area, and indeed anyone passionate about our local history, in favour of an extension of the proposed Earls Ferry Heritage Area along Newstead Avenue, up to and including the historical dot residence at 8 Thompson Road. I'm arguing that based on its current scope, the proposed Earls Ferry Heritage Area fails to meet its objective under the local planning policy number 4 for 2 reasons. First of all, the proposed heritage area as advertised on the 1st of November is currently limited to a single place of historical significance. The small cluster of dwellings included alongside Earls Ferry Court are all newish. They date back to the 1990s when lot 500 Newstead Avenue was subdivided. Further, the current proposal excludes number 2 Earls Ferry Court, a Federation area dwelling immediately opposite, and sites at number 1 and number 2 Newstead Avenue, which border Earls Ferry Court. Any development at especially number 1 Newstead Avenue, which is a corner block which currently sits vacant, will in particular impact on the character of the significance of Earls Ferry as it sits immediately in the line of sight. And to make that point, for those people who are not familiar with the area, I've got the map, if you just have a look, this is Newstead Avenue, Earls Ferry Court is over there. We're talking about this block. So when you come down the only access road, it's in the direct line of sight onto Earls Ferry Court, so it borders the road. An extension of the proposed heritage area to include Newstead Avenue and the Category 2 listed dot residence at 8 Thompson Road would position the Category 1 listed Earls Ferry site within its geographical, cultural and historical context, to ensure that future developments will not adversely affect its significance and character. And an expanded heritage area would also ensure that the entire area and single access route are developed sympathetic to the existing character of the heritage place. Indeed, I believe it's important that a heritage area for Nurstead Avenue is not considered separately, but within the scope of the existing proposed Earls Ferry Heritage Area, or as Jean argued last week, maybe we should actually more aptly name it Nurstead Estate Heritage Area, but I'll leave that there. The lots on what was referred to as Nurstead Estate, named after Jane Stott ancestral home in Greenwich, England, was subdivided for sale in 1902 and gradually developed. And just to give you an idea, this is what we're talking about. This is how the street came about, really. The briefing notes for today's meeting note that only 4 properties in Nurstead Avenue are currently included in the local heritage survey. To provide some context to that, Nurstead Avenue is a short dead-end road with only 21 full blocks. What the briefing notes failed to disclose is that a further 4 properties have been put forward by the respective owners for inclusion in the heritage survey, plus likely an additional property on Earls Ferry Court. Collectively, these Federation homes or Federation area properties, all of which go back to the very early 1900s, reflect the full extent of housing in existence around at the time Earls Ferry Court or Earls Ferry House was built as a resident for the Commission of Railways. And to provide you with the context for that, this is a photo going back to the early 1900s and really showing you those properties that are there, they're all still there. So they're all still in their place, and they've just since then looked after really by their respective guardians. So this is a photograph that was taken from the Santa Rosa Distillery Tower on the other side of the train tracks, and it really captures those original properties prior to the area being actually named Bassendean. That was still West Guildford at the time, and as you can see, there's no Swan Districts in the background. That came quite a bit later. These properties featured in the image are all there today still, and going back to the map I had early on, it gives you an idea. If you have a look at, and I can't really see it, but this is the original state records sewage map overlaid with the current Google map. I can hand it around, it's a bit hard to see. But what you see there is that all the original properties are still in their place as per the image. What has happened though in the meantime, that the gaps in between, so all your kitchen gardens and your grazing areas have since been filled in with newer properties. So no more cows roaming across the train tracks, but the original places are all still intact today, luckily. So what we're saying is any developments and extensions over the past 120 years have been kept in character with these early suburban Federation style homes. And most importantly, the integrity of the facades has been maintained. And to give you an idea, for those of you who haven't been down there, what we're talking about, and these aren't the best pictures, but we're talking about these kind of houses that are still there in their place and they're being looked after by the respective guardians. Previously known as West Guildford, this area is rich of history valued by the Bassendean community and a core feature on the town's much-loved heritage trail. Indeed, if we go even further back, this area would have represented a vital connection between the male meeting place that was assumed to be in Success Hill and a female meeting place in the Bendaring Park area by the local Noongar people. So last week we heard that proposed density and infill targets would present a challenge for an extension of the proposed Earls Ferry Heritage Area alongside Nurstead Avenue. However, I'd like to point out 2 key points. First of all, the existing Old Perth Heritage Area, Old Perth Heritage Precinct and Special Control Area includes areas earmarked for high density at R160. Also, a section of the Kenny Street precinct, an area between Kenny and Kathleen Street towards the Old Perth Road end, is zoned as R40 to accommodate townhouses. So given this precedent, it would suggest that contrary to advice given last week, a heritage precinct can be created without a structure plan being completed. Indeed, the introduction of the Kenny Street Heritage Precinct did what was suggested for Nurstead Avenue in the 2005 Heritage Inventory, and that was the establishment of a heritage precinct that would allow to collectively protect a cluster of buildings without requiring individual owners to nominate their properties for inclusion in the heritage survey. Again, there's precedent, driven by the desire to protect the town's history against the backdrop of recognising that some owners may be reluctant to nominate their particular property for inclusion. That could be time, that could be misconceptions or whatever it might be. Residents of Nurstead Avenue and surrounds had until very recently been under the impression that this idea of a heritage overlay had been pursued and acted upon. Hence, there's this overwhelming support amongst local residents, supported by community groups such as the Successful Action Group and the Bassendean Historical Society, to formally recognise the historical, cultural and social value of this area by including it in the Earls Ferry Heritage Area. In last week's briefing session, we heard that any consideration of Nurstead Avenue to be included as an heritage area would have a major resourcing implication, and it was suggested that would take about 1.5 years in terms of a timeline. As someone with a background in community consultation, I challenge this assumption. Most of the groundwork has already been done. The local history has been compiled, a lot of it thanks to Councillor Carter in a book, but also due to, based on historic rate books, historic titles and postal records. The local studies librarian has assisted in compiling additional data, including genealogies of individual houses, or rather their previous owners. The sign used for the Earls Ferry Court consultation actually still stands in Nurstead Avenue, down at the end of the road. So all that's really required is a new map, some sticky tape, some staples, and a new deadline. However, given that the majority of owners in the immediate area have already invested time to write to the town in support of an extension alongside Nurstead Avenue, I anticipate this to be a relatively straightforward process reflecting community expectations. I argue that beyond the administrative desire to tie up loose ends, i.e. to transfer the existing built form policy provisions from the current local planning policy number 5 to the local planning policy number 4, there is no immediate urgency for councillors to approve recommended changes in their current form as per the officer's recommendations for tonight's meeting. Indeed, as someone with a background in this area, I argue that ignoring valid concerns raised and recommendations made as part of the consultation period not only undermines the process, but fails to recognise valuable opportunities to create a heritage area that is fit for purpose and actually achieves what it sets out to do. So we've continuously heard that any removal of special control areas and decisions made relating to the lower successful area are the result of explicit requests by the WA Planning Commission. However, as confirmed by the State Minister for Planning and Housing, the Honourable John Kerry, only recently, the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage has not requested the removal of heritage protections for this area. Indeed, the Minister has emphasised that local governments have a number of options available to protect the local heritage, including heritage areas and local planning policy provisions. Residents are fully aware that the introduction of a heritage area is separate to proposed zoning changes under LPS 11. However, as you would all be aware, the two processes are related. If we do indeed want to ensure that local heritage within the town is recognised, cared for and utilised, as per the vision in our latest town strategy, then we need to put appropriate provisions in place prior to said heritage to be undermined and encroached upon by developments that explicitly contradict any proposed provisions. So contrary to suggestions made last week, this responsibility cannot be placed on local residents. It relies on the local council to make decisive decisions and to put appropriate provisions in place. Thank you.
Thank you for your deputation. If you can remain there, as councillors may have some questions for you. So I open the floor to councillors that may wish to ask Dr. Wolf a question. Councillor Wilding.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor, and thank you, Dr. Wolf, as well for your deputation and for that huge amount of information you provided us as well. I think the value of the area is absolutely clear to Council. In your deputation, you stated an opposition to considering the Nurstead Avenue precinct separately. Could you elaborate on where that opposition comes from?
Yes, it's that interconnection between the period it relates to. So Earls Ferry Court was built at the same time as the properties or the existing properties in Nurstead Avenue. So it's that cultural historical context that relate to the same era to the same period, and that's why I see them all fit together.
Do you believe that that having two separate heritage precincts that are considered in succession that would interplay would have the same outcome overall though, even though it wouldn't be the immediate outcome in time you'd achieve the same result?
Yeah, I've got two concerns in that regard. First of all, I've got a concern by signing off on one provision and then potentially delaying the review and the consideration of the next step, and that in itself could actually create an enormous amount of work and burden on councillors, because that means eventually this is going to come back, people have to get rebriefed. It might actually take far more time and resourcing than doing it all in one go. I've also got concerns about having those two areas side by side, directly aligned, even though they relate to the same area, because what that actually means also is that one can be kind of let go quite quickly again, once we know the other one has to stay in place.
Any other councillors have a question? All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, apologies. Didn't see you hiding there, Madam Mayor. You're on mute, I believe.
Technologically challenged. Apologies. I'd like to question, given that there are a collection of residents seeking to have this area have a heritage overlay or whatever you like to call it for this area, would they be interested in collectively perhaps getting a consultant's report on the value of that area to present to council? Because I can see that as fast tracking the process, because there was a discussion during that piece about delays. So would Ms. North be able to answer that question?
I would need to seek further advice on that, because I'm not entirely familiar with the process. It's said a lot of information. It has already been provided, documented, it's already available there. What that process would entail, I would need further information on and explore that.
I might just follow up the Mayor's question. If it were the case that Council were to request that there be an investigation into a separate Nurstead, so if the Earls Ferry area were to pass this evening, but that was thought to be done on an expedited basis, and that it could be demonstrated that by engaging that consultant, that could cause that to happen sooner rather than later. I suppose it's not a decision you'd have to make this evening, but that's something which you would be open to considering with the other residents.
Of course, because that wouldn't be my decision, that would be a collective decision. So yeah, again, it's kind of finding out what the process is, what it would involve, what it would entail and involve, and then kind of reporting back.
Yeah, that's quite understandable. Thank you.
Thank
you. My question would be, there's already been a lot of work done in this. I think no one's disputing the fact that this is a heritage area, and we understand it to be, and it has a great link back to the past century and even prior to white settlement here. But so if we have all this information, you've done an enormous amount of work for the people in Nurstead Avenue. Wouldn't that be sufficient to allow, you know, a heritage overlay to just be an addendum to the LPS 11? Just a query.
Councillor Carter, is that a question for Dr. Wolf, or do we need to wait for the main item? I'm happy for you to put it to Dr. Wolf, but I'm not sure what her answer could provide you with.
I'd say yes. But adding to that, thank you. I do wonder if there is scope, if all this information is available, does it always have to go to an external consultant? That would be a question from my end. Or can something actually be provided at a local level, given there's expertise in that area, and we've actually drawn on expertise beyond that area, rather than having to outsource to compile that particular report?
Might just leave that item for a question for Councillor Carter to perhaps ask the Director of Planning during the item itself, so that it doesn't go missed.
Yes, it sort of wandered off everywhere, but I'll take advantage of that. Thank you, Acting Mayor.
Good.
Does that exhaust all the questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, keeping with the Nurstead area, I'd like to invite Kate Davies to provide her deputation.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Kate Davies from 16A Nurstead Avenue. I'd like to start by thanking the Council for listening. But then I would like to veer into letting you know that we are deeply upset by the way the issue of the zoning and development of Nurstead Avenue has been handled over the past few years. And we would like you to work with us in 2024 to set it right. Council is meeting tonight to discuss potential approval and extension of the Earls Ferry House Protection Area, and we have argued here today and this week and last week that it should be renamed the Nurstead Estate Heritage Area and extended to include most of the area covered by the 1902 Nurstead Estate Land Release. Katharina showed you an image of that. Our reasoning is that we note that on page 3 of the 2021 Master Plan, one side of Nurstead Avenue is coloured red for 5-storey development. The other side is slightly paler red for 3-storey development. I know that we are not here tonight to discuss the master plan, but we need to touch on the issue because whatever objections we raise to changes in conditions regarding Nurstead Estate are being dismissed on the grounds of it. We were apparently meant to voice our opinions then and not now, despite the fact that the consultation period coincided with peak COVID in our community. The heritage page of the master plan, page 4, includes a footnote saying that the heritage information was drawn from the Town of Bassendean Municipal Heritage Inventory 2017, which lists 4 Nurstead houses, 8, 9, 11, 12. And yet it does not include 8 Thompson Road, or the Moreton Bay Fig Tree in its designated areas of significance, although these are on the 2015 Bassendean Heritage List. In the master plan, the area where this house sits is marked as having no historical significance. It's coloured dark red for 6-storey development. This discrepancy shows that the master plan contains errors that need to be amended. The opening line of the master plan is, "The following principles have been developed through extensive community and stakeholder engagement that underpin the development of the master plan." But clearly, Council failed to communicate the scale of the proposal at the time of the master plan was being developed, and the proof of this is that we didn't respond, as we are doing now, and have done. Perhaps it's because in mid-April 2021, when the 2 workshops were held, we had COVID, or we were in lockdown, or we were very wary of attending community meetings at the time. I've read the survey report, based on 669 responses, and one of them was mine. I filled it in at a community event. Tick, tick, tick. I wasn't sitting with the master plan at the time. I'd like to question some of the interpretations of the responses. 84% saying that they were supportive of heritage retention does not mean that they would be happy to see heritage trashed in the way the master plan proposes. Also note that according to your own data, there were 101 submissions expressing concerns about building heights, compared to only 12 saying there should be increased density around train stations. You may have consulted the community, but I'm not sure you listened to them. We are the same people, living in the same houses, and when we were notified of the change in zoning that resulted from the master plan, we responded en masse and in unity. Appalled, we filled this chamber, only to be told that we were too late because the master plan had already been written. This failure of the Council's communication strategy is probably compounded by the absence of local media that could have played a part in letting us know about Council decisions. And as the journalist whose work once led to the Wanneroo Inc. inquiry, I am only too aware of the need for work to be done, translating Council decisions into lay terms to enable community feedback. And I am now willing to step up to do this on this issue. We've been told since the meeting that approved the zoning change by Luke Gibson that as long as we don't develop our properties, the change in zoning will mean nothing. However, we question his argument as zoning changes are specifically strategically used to bring about urban change. And in this case, the level of opposition to development from the current occupants of Nurstead Avenue, there is likely to be slow to minimal change on most blocks, except for the two owned by the state government. And they are likely to be ambitiously and incongruously developed. This will mean that council will have achieved what is called sore thumb development. This is something most urban planners actively avoid. If you Google the term sore thumb development, you'll find several articles by urban planners around the world warning against planning decisions that encourage or enable sore thumb developments. However, as we were told in this chamber last week that there are no current development applications for Nurstead Estate before council, it is not too late for council to act to apply the same kind of protections that it has applied to Kenny and Devon Streets to Nurstead Avenue, and to avoid facilitating sore thumb developments. In terms of changes and discrepancies between the council's various heritage lists and protection recommendations, we were told here in this chamber that a heritage overlay in an early draft of the LPS had been removed at the request of the WA Planning Commission. We sought clarification about this from State MP Dave Kelly, who put the question to Minister for Planning John Carey, who categorically denied removing the heritage protections. He wrote, the department, did however request that design provisions that largely duplicated local planning policy provisions be removed. These policy provisions continue to apply to this area irrespective of their removal from the scheme. He put it back to the town of Bassendean to provide clarity and specifically said the local government could designate an area for protection as opposed to individual properties. And we are happy to show these letters to the councillors. There has also been a suggestion that our opposition is a NIMBY response, to which we say rubbish. Heritage is for everyone, present and future, and if anything, we're making sacrifices in order to preserve something for others. It's not too late to rectify the situation. Failure to take action now to rectify it will lead to the destruction of one of the most iconic and beautiful parts of Bassendean, and an area of importance to the whole of WA. Actions that can be taken to support the preservation of Nurstead Estate are firstly applying a heritage overlay or clarifying the existence of an existing heritage protection for Nurstead Estate as soon as possible. And we recognise the need for a 21-day consultation period, but dispute that there's a need for a lengthy historic investigation. That work has already been done. I can cite at least 3 books: History of Bassendean, 1947 by Alf Thomas, Bassendean A Social History, 1986 by Jenny Carter, Bassendean A Brief History, 2012 by Jenny Carter. In addition, there's a wealth of material on the town's own local studies collection page of its website, and there are additional materials from the Bassendean Library, the WA State Library, and in the Federal Trove Archives. And to answer the earlier question, there are academics in this room willing to collate that information and reference it if that is all that is required. Secondly, please work with us to reduce the zoning and alter the master plan's proposed 3, 5 and 6-storey approvals on the grounds of the historic significance of the area. Thank you for your time tonight.
Well, thank you for your deputation. I'll open the floor to questions from councillors. Who would like to go first? Mayor Hamilton. You're muted again.
Thank you very much. To just ask Ms. Davies, does she realise that the town centre master plan is actually not a statutory document? So consequently, documents that have more relevance to that area are things like draft LPS 11. So I was just wondering if our lady doing the deputation actually realised that.
I would call it a lack of clarity on the part of the town that would and the way that these things stack, it seems to me that the considerations in LPS were based on the considerations in the master plan. I keep on hearing that these things sort of stack up and you can't change this because it's in that and you can't change this because it's in that. From my reading, and it is not my full-time job to research this, but from my reading it appears that many things anchor back to the master plan, and that one can't quibble with the later documents because people refer back to the master plan as a core document.
Thank you.
Who would like to ask the next question? Councillor Wilding.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you, Dr. Davies, for your deputation as well. Similar question as the one I put to Dr. Wolfe. There is a foreshadowed amendment to consider the Nurstead area separately. Do you have any thoughts or opposition to considering the Nurstead section at a later date?
I have no opposition to the protection of Earls Ferry. I'm very keen to see the extension. I understand Katerina's concern about the potential abyss between the approval of one and the other. So if there's a commitment from council to work with us in 2024 on rectifying this and including the whole of Nurstead Estate, then I would be happy to see Earls Ferry protected as quickly and thoroughly as possible.
Councillor Carter.
I'm sorry, this is a question to our governance officer. Given that my name's been mentioned, do I have to declare an impartiality interest?
I would suggest it would be in the councillor's best interest to this. When it comes time for the yes, you can declare it now, if that is your desire.
Yes, I'll declare an impartiality interest in the history of Bassendean, the Earls Ferry part, as it forms part of that history. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Councillor Carter. Do we have any other questions from councillors? If not, I had a question. You refer to the Nurstead estate. So obviously the housing development that occurred back in 1902. Probably lost to time as to what people's attitudes were at the time, whether there were people for or against that back then. Who can say? But in terms of the development that is currently being proposed, and you had mentioned that you wanted to cover the entire area. Are you aware of there being some residents within that expanded area that were, I suppose, in favour of LPS 11? Because I think in fairness to them, given that we have ventured to discuss LPS 11, I think there were some residents that were in favour.
If you were to look at the proposal that we've actually sent to council, we've sent several documents to council and all of the councillors. The area where we're actually proposing excises, that area, the only house on Thompson Road is Thompson Road number 8, because we're aware that people elsewhere on Thompson Road are very pro-development. Also, while I've used the term Nurstead Estate, I'm not talking about the area that's on the other side of Lord Street. So yes, yes, I am aware that there's at least one landowner very excited about the prospect of multi-storey development, but
yeah, it was, as I said, just out of fairness, given that you had straight to LPS 11 and given that that wasn't the agenda item and those residents were not able to put their voice forward, I thought we would just put that
sure.
on the record. Sure. In terms of the extent to which you would see this heritage area, if there were, I suppose, an amendment to what's being proposed where there would be an exploration as to how much of Nurstead would be within such a heritage area, is that a process that you would be happy to participate in?
Sure. I'm happy to participate in processes.
Yes. Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do we have any further questions? If not, that concludes our deputations. Thank you for coming along.
Thank you.
we're going to move into statements. There was one person that had indicated they wanted to make a statement and they would be present today, so I would invite Sam James to come forward. Do we have Sam James here this evening? We have received that statement and we will respond to him in due course. Given that that was the only statement of which we had notice, was there any other community member here that would like to make a statement? All right, well that makes it easy enough. We will then move to question time. Are there any community members here that would like, Dr. Wolf?
Apologies about the unruly crowd. Yes, I've got a couple of questions. As noted in the officer's response in the attachments for today's meeting, may I clarify why the proposed heritage area is advertised does not apply to number 9, lot 2, Earls Ferry Court, given that this property is located centrally within the proposed heritage area directly in line of sight when coming down Newstead Avenue. So I'm referring to item 13 in that table.
Thank you for that question. I might refer you to the Director of Planning, if you're able to assist.
Through the chair, just if you bear with me, I'll find that attachment. Through the chair, I believe if we're talking about response number 13, which is lot number 9, lot 2, that is asking, basically as previously shared, do some reservations about the heritage listing. The officer response, the proposed heritage area as advertised does not apply to the subject site. That response is incorrect, unfortunately. The proposed heritage area, as you can see from the attachment, the actual plan in the report, covers the area south of the railway and east of Earls Ferry Court, so certainly takes in number 9, lot 2, and so that response, unfortunately, is an error. And yes, the correct answer is that that is very much within the proposed heritage area, as it was also subject to LPP 5 prior to. So apologies for that error.
Okay, I've got another question though.
Yep, happy to proceed.
Thank you. So beyond the administrative desire to move from one policy provision to another, and I'd like to hear from the relevant individuals what they would see as a disadvantage or potential risk if a decision regarding the proposed Earls Ferry Heritage Area was delayed to enact option 2 under the Planning and Development Regulations 2015, which would be to proceed the policy with modifications. So are there any major drawbacks or are there any kind of major challenges if this decision was delayed slightly?
Director of Planning, can you assist?
Through Madam Mayor, as sort of discussed last week and as broadly set out in the report, we've determined that it's simply not an option for council to go down that path. If council wants to effectively acquiesce to the request, staff would be suggesting council pursues option 3 on page 14, which is effectively to do nothing and not proceed with the policy, and thereafter start a fresh process. That's obviously not the staff recommendation. The staff recommendation is, of course, to tie off this current process, being transitioning the provisions from one policy to another, and undertaking to effectively address or look into the issue as part of the broader precinct structure plan. But if council was minded to advance that in ahead of the precinct structure plan, but without actually adopting an updated LPP4, I would recommend council in that instance proceed with option number 3, which is to maintain the status quo for the time being, not adopt the advertised or modified policy, and request through the CEO that staff start a fresh process.
Thank you. Slightly confusing because the options vary. I've got one more question and then I promise I'll go away. I believe there have been some major, and this is related to this, there have been some major staffing changes at the local library. What are the town's plans for the extensive work and archive created by the local studies librarian going forward?
I guess given that's a little, I suppose, non-core to the issue, I'm not sure that we'd have an immediate answer, but I might ask the CEO whether that's something which he could provide in due course.
I'm happy to take that on notice.
Okay.
Right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Do we have any further questions? Yep, please come forward.
More of a comment perhaps, but I think it's a little harsh for Councillor Carter to be excluded from a process on the grounds that
I might
she's written
just
books.
clarify that the impartiality interest which she's declared is just to let everybody know that she essentially wrote the history of Bassendean, as it were. It's not a financial interest, so she is able to participate in the discussions going forward. It's just her letting everybody know, so she's not being excluded from anything.
Excellent, thank you for clarifying.
Great, thank you. If there are no further questions, that is the end of question time. We'll move on to petitions. Mr. CEO, no petitions. Confirmation of the minutes from the council meeting held on the 28th of November. Do I have a, that's item 9.1. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor John, and a seconder? Councillor Carter, thank you. Business deferred from a previous meeting, is there any of that? Thank you, Mr. CEO. External committee reports and updates. So we have none of those. So moving into the officer reports, there was the adoption of recommendations on block. I understand, and we get the guidance on this, that there was one item which potentially had to find its way out of on block, given that it was a subject.
Excuse me, Deputy Mayor, point of order. The council is required to move and second and note point 11 according to the agenda.
Mr. CEO, that there are no. Thank you, Councillor Wilding. I'll take that as you moving that item. And do I have a seconder? Councillor Carter, and unless there is any opposition, which I don't see any online or in the room, I'll take that as passed. So, thank you, Councillor Wilding. Moving on to item 12, so the officer reports. Now, item 12.1, this is to move the items on block. So currently, so that is items 12.3, 12.6, 12.7 and 12.9, which are to be moved on block unless there's any councillor that wishes to remove any of those items from on block. Madam Mayor, was it?
So 12.8 is coming out?
It has. 12.8's been removed from on block.
Okay, thank you. I just had to check because the recording is breaking up every so often. Thank you.
Not a problem. Thank you.
Sorry,
so,
Deputy
yep.
Mayor, did you say 12.6?
Yes, 12.6, so the Autumn Governance Committee meeting, that's to be passed on block.
Okay, and sorry if I'm not following
Unless you wish to
protocol
remove it.
here. There was just one item in regards to accuracy of addresses in the audit and governance which was tabled as to be explored. I'm not sure that's been captured. I saw your response, Paul. It wasn't that one. It was in regards to the addresses on Highland Street.
Is it 27 Highland?
It went up to 47. 37 to 47. I'm not sure the street goes that far. Yeah.
Is that something that can be dealt with
Offline.
administratively?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yes, I would have thought so. I'm not sure it would necessarily interfere with the item at this point, but I'll have an answer for you by the end of the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Burke. So as it stands, the items that I read out are to be put on block. So that's simply as per the officer recommendation, with 12.8 being the calendar of meetings removed. So if I had a mover for those on block, Councillor John, seconder, Councillor Wilding, thank you. So that then leaves the remaining items, 12.2, 12.4, 12.5, 12.10, 12.11 and 12.12. And of course 12.8. Moving on to item 12.2. So this is the draft amended local planning policy for heritage and character, being the item that was the subject of deputations. I might allow the Director of Planning to provide some background on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Through you, I suppose I'd just probably like to clarify some of the things that were raised by the members of the public tonight, just for everyone's benefit. The reference I made last week to a time period between 1.5 and 2 years was not in relation to the local planning policy. It was in relation to the precinct structure plan, which is a far broader body of work. Obviously, the staff recommendation for this item is to have the Nurstead precinct considered as part of the precinct structure plan, but I certainly was not suggesting a policy would take 1.5 years to 2 years to progress. That was clearly a reference to the precinct structure plan. There was a comment that was correct insofar as there is no particular urgency for this matter. As we've sort of maintained the whole way through, this was seemingly at the start of the process a reasonably modest tidy up of our suite of local planning policies, consolidating 2 policies into one for the sake of convenience as much as everything else, and to undertake a review of the policy more generally. So there was no major call for it apart from staff undertaking a pretty routine review and seeking to consolidate the policy, but that aside, as the submitter suggested, there is no great urgency to a council decision on this at this point in time. But obviously, given the work that's been done thus far, it would still be our recommendation to proceed as per the officer report. In terms of the reference to the special control area and it being a special control area for heritage being removed, that is just simply not the case. There was a special control area that was discussed and that was being proposed for a period of time, but that was not in relation to heritage and character. That was in relation to vehicular access from Guildford Road. So the balance of it was broadly correct, is that it was removed at the behest of the department, but it was not to do with heritage and character. Otherwise, I suppose the fundamental question the council needs to consider as part of this decision and any time it subsequently considers the matter of Nurstead Ave is what outcome it is seeking. In terms of the comment about sort of the cascading of documents, that's not unfair. That is typically how these things work, and I suppose the document that we need to be going back to is not the Town Centre Master Plan, it is the state government's central sub-regional framework from 2018, which identifies this part of the district as a district level activity centre. So that was agreed to by both sides of politics back in 2018, and that has been obviously a guiding factor for planning in the town of Bassendean and the rest of the central region over the last 5 years. So the Town Centre Master Plan is certainly a consideration. As the Mayor sort of suggested before, It's a non-statutory document. It's a visioning exercise of what the town could potentially be like in years to come, but it's not a statutory tool. But it is certainly a consideration. So it was part of the discussion with regard to the local planning strategy and local planning scheme. But as importantly, and probably much more importantly, the 2018 Central Sub-Regional Framework was the primary document that's sort of guiding development in the town of Bassendean. But that's probably it from me for the moment, but certainly understand there'll be some questions.
Councillors. Councillor Carter.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I understand that. So from what I'm hearing tonight, and because it's the local planning policy, it could be quite a simple matter just to include the Earls Ferry, Nurstead Avenue into the Earls Ferry precinct. Am I right?
Madam Mayor, not tonight. We haven't. There has been no proposal put forward to council for its consideration through the formal setting, where council would have to resolve to adopt it for the purpose of advertising. We'd have to undertake the consultation and bring back a report to council. So, what is being asked for can be done. It cannot be done tonight. And again, it goes back to that question of what council would be seeking to achieve by such a process, because that would obviously guide what any potential provisions would look like and what they would serve to achieve. So it could be pursued. It can't be done via an amendment this evening. As I said in response to a previous query, if council wanted to pursue option 3, which is effectively do nothing and sort of leave the status quo and start a fresh process, that is something that can be done. Staff's view on that is that the preference would be to embed that work into the broader precinct structure plan.
Yes, I understand, because there's been an awful lot of work being done and we wouldn't like to have to start the process all over again. But it did seem from what you were saying, and I may have misunderstood, that this would, because it's a local planning policy rather than the LPS, the local planning scheme, that we could add this heritage overlay fairly simply, and we could work to having that done. So, but wouldn't it mean the whole of the local planning policy needed to be rewritten or reworked?
Through Madam, sorry, apologies. Just old habits. Through the chair. If the question is, can this work be done without the involvement of the state government? Yes. It's a local planning policy. The state government typically wouldn't have a role to play, so it's something that would be up to council to determine. The whole policy would not require a rewrite. Large tracts of the policy would endure. I suppose what we would need to know in the first instance is, again, what council's seeking to achieve by this process, and whether that's practically achievable, because some things will be, some things probably less so. And I suppose what council probably needs to understand is that if this body of work's been elevated ahead of the precinct structure plan, that is a decision that council can make to request the CEO reprioritise various planning frameworks. But if council elevates this body of work above and before the precinct structure plan, that is something council could reasonably do. What it will do, however, is push back progress on the precinct structure plan.
Last question, I promise no more. Why would that be? That would push back progress on the precinct structure plan, as this is just a sort of an addition to the local planning policy?
Through Madam Mayor, it's probably not as straightforward as it seems. We'd need to come up with actual planning provisions to control development in that precinct. So we'd actually have to construct the planning framework as it relates to that precinct. We can only really do that when, again, we understand what council wants to achieve. And to be quite frank, we're a small local government with limited resources, and we can't do everything concurrently. So if council wants to elevate this, that's okay, but it comes at the expense of something else.
Any Other questions from councillors? Mayor Hamilton, please. Mute.
Noting that the whole purpose of this policy before us is planning control to conserve and enhance the cultural heritage, significance and character of areas. In this case, the Elsbury area. Would it not be possible if work is done to assess the heritage value of Nurstead Avenue at some future date, would it not be possible for either a separate heritage area from Nurstead or a combined combination with Elsbury in the future? I would assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, I would assume that if there is a further work on Nurstead Avenue in respect to its heritage value, that would again go out to 21 days of advertising. Would that be correct?
Through the chair, all that's broadly correct and pretty much aligns with what the staff recommendation is in this instance, that we're not adverse to looking into the issue. In the report it says that we think there'd merit in at least considering it. All we're saying is that we think it's appropriate to complete as part of the broader body of work, just to ensure that we're not delaying that broader body of work, which effectively is the number one thing we need to do under the local planning strategy. So broadly what Councillor Mayor Hamilton has said is quite correct. If Council wanted to resolve as recommended this evening, there is nothing stopping us coming back at a later time to either A, extend the precinct to Thompson Road, say, or B, come up with a new precinct that just happens to abut the other precinct, or C, council's entitled to not make a heritage area at all. We're not presupposing either of those three outcomes, but simply saying our recommendation is to deal with the issue as part of the broader precinct structure plan.
Further question, if you don't mind. Noting in one of the documents, and I can't remember where it was, I note that the Carrick Heritage study that was undertaken in 2018, from memory, played a major part in the background information for the other heritage areas in the town, i.e. Devon Road, Ken Street Precinct, the Old Perth Road Upper Precinct, and now Elsbury. So given that that information is to hand, from my memory, it was quite a comprehensive and detailed report. Would that not have also, given that the policy for Elsbury has substantially been created, particularly if we go with the officer's recommendation 1 and 2, points 1 and 2, would it be that much work to actually investigate the heritage value of the Nurstead precinct? Just out of interest.
Through Madam Mayor, I think there would be at least some work involved, because the body of work you're referring to from 2018, I think it was by Hocking Heritage Studios, it recommended the creation of a number of heritage areas, and it did not recommend the creation of a heritage area for Nurstead. So we would need to revisit that as to why that was the case, and obviously it's before my time at the town side. I don't have any first-hand knowledge of why that was the case, but the prevailing body of work that the town uses on the matter does not recommend a heritage area. That's not to say a heritage area cannot be entertained, because as you see from the officer report, we're suggesting it's a body of work that we're prepared to do. But to sort of oversimplify the process based on the fact that we've got some documents already assembled, I think is probably a risk there. And I think we would need to, given that there's processes for reviewing local heritage surveys as set up by the DPOH, we would need to actually see what this project looked like before we committed to how easy or difficult it might be. Again, that's not to say we don't do it, because the staff recommendation again is that we do it as part of a broader body of work.
I'll leave the question there, thank you.
Do we have further questions? Councillor Wilding.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and to Mr. Gibson. I think you probably already talked to this a little bit in your previous answers, but given that there's a foreshadowed amendment from Mayor Hamilton, could you talk or provide a specific response to that proposed amendment?
Through you, Madam Mayor, probably the thing that stands out first and foremost is the setting of the time limit. That's not really appropriate, I don't believe, and that might be something the Manager of Governance and Strategy or the CEO wants to talk to, but it would normally be the case where if a request is made to the CEO, it might be that the CEO brings back some information to Council to advise how long something might take, as opposed to stipulating a time frame. That aside, putting aside the time frame, it largely aligns with the staff recommendation anyway, is that we are open to the possible expansion of the heritage area. Says that plainly in the officer report. We're not pushing back against it. We're saying we can't do it tonight for the reasons I've mentioned, but we're certainly not saying no. So putting aside, if you take out the issue of Council dictating timeframes to the CEO, the rest of it broadly aligns with the officer recommendation, so no major dramas.
Councillor Wilding.
Thank
and then I have you, Mayor Hamilton, after Councillor Wilding.
Thank you.
Sorry, I just want to point out that I have an error in point 3, and I've referenced local planning policy 3, but it should be local planning policy 4. Apologies for that.
Thank you. I think we will all read that as 4. Councillor Wilding.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So would it be fair to say that as point 3 is written, it would be reasonable to suggest that the report returned by the administration would suggest incorporating it into the precinct structure plan?
Through Madam Mayor, I'd suggest that's probably reasonable, yes.
I have a question. Director Gibson, there was some mention during the deputations of the assistance that might be provided by external consultants, and I hear you've referenced the consultants that prepared the other heritage areas. If that was something which were provided by the residents, would that be able to assist in a way which would enable us to provide this in a more faster than it otherwise we would be able to?
Through the Chair, certainly the assistance of the landowners would be advantageous insofar as gaining details about each individual property, because those are the sort of details that you would normally expect to be included in an LHS listing. So having easy and early access to that information would be useful. Again, I don't think that means that this would be turned around in a matter of weeks, because there is an appropriate process to follow to review and update your local heritage survey, and that may well still require some independent consultants to undertake a objective appraisal of the sites.
Thank you. Further questions? Mayor Hamilton, did you have a question?
When you're ready, I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation with my amendment. I'll leave it at that, just when you're ready.
Thank you. And Councillor Carter.
Just very briefly, because we've had a lot of discussion around this, can we say that there is no objection from the administration or council at the moment to having a heritage overlay over Nurstead Avenue, as far as we can tell?
Through the Chair, there's no objection to the proposition. Whether or not the area warrants a heritage area, we simply don't know, because the information available through the 2018 body of work, given that it made specific recommendations for 3 areas and this was not one of them, I think the default position would be, as it has been up until this point, is that it probably doesn't warrant one, but we're open-minded to the prospect, and, as we've said in the report, prepared to do the work as part of the broader precinct structure plan.
Mayor Hamilton?
May I ask a question?
Certainly.
Through yourself, Deputy Mayor, to Mr Gibson, if I amended point 3 to something along the lines of subject to provision of consultant's report via residents, council request preparation, blah blah blah, so continue on with that point, would that be acceptable to the administration? Because that, if I'm hearing correctly, if there was an assistance with the consultant's report provided by residents, that might enable this body of work to be done in the timeline that I'm requesting. That is not provided, then you can proceed as per the original plan by the administration. Would that be something that would be acceptable?
Through the chair, potentially, I suppose it is putting council's decision this evening is to do with the policy that sits before it, and that's broadly covered by parts 1 and 2. So part 3, either as the officer has drafted it or Madam Mayor has potentially amended it, isn't a decision in the same way as parts 1 and 2 are, which is the operative part of the report to make the decision to adopt this policy or not. It would be a little bit unusual, I suppose, to have a resolution that potentially puts an obligation on a third party. But if council was comfortable with that, that's okay. I suppose the other thing to say is that, well, even with that, if the inference or the implication is that the policy is pulled ahead of the precinct structure plan, again, that is okay. But the natural sort of consequence of that is the precinct structure plan goes down the pecking order and will be done subsequent to that other body of work. So council just needs to be aware that we're not resourced to undertake all these things concurrently, and it needs to make some decisions around the relative priorities of these bodies of work.
Can I just add further to that? Whilst it sounds a reasonable request to invite the members of the community to contribute to it, we are confined to the Local Government Act and our procurement processes, and just because somebody else is paying for it doesn't mean to say the work gets any easier. I can tell you now that the work will get harder in trying to facilitate individuals parting with their cash and what instruments we have in place. So I think, councillors, we're turning something quite simple into something very complicated.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Hamilton. I'll just confirm that everybody is aware, or councillors are aware of Mayor Hamilton's proposed amendment. And I ask that because the process that we'll adopt is if there is anybody that wants to move the officer's recommendation as is, I give them the opportunity to do that now.
I'd just like to ask a quick question first.
Certainly.
And this is a question likely for the CEO, would setting a time frame not be an operational and not a strategic decision, so inappropriate for council to make?
You are correct, particularly given it wasn't a notice of motion with 10 days' notice. This arrived this afternoon on the day of a council meeting, so to understand what the process would be and the time it would take and the body of work, you're exactly correct. That's why Mr Gibson's response was 100% correct. Council should not be directing a CEO to do something in a time frame without first giving him the courtesy of determining what can be done in the time frame and what money. Remember, we adopted a budget with a zero balance. We haven't had a mid-year budget review. It's due in February. So there is no money left to go away and spend on consultants.
In that case, it would be my preference to move the original officer's report.
Thank you, Councillor John. I have you as the mover for the officer's recommendation. Madam Mayor?
May I ask one more question?
Certainly.
I know that in the past, I think it was less than a year ago, through the chair to Mr there were some additions to the local heritage survey, and I was wondering if consultants were used at that time to put those additions into the local survey.
Through you, Madam Mayor, if that's referring to, from memory, is a couple of local parks. If that's the reference, no, I don't believe consultants were used to support that.
So, am I correct in assuming that there can be additions to the local heritage survey without the necessity of using consultants?
Through the chair, I'll probably go back to my previous response about the process set out by the DPLH for reviewing, updating your local heritage survey. Those two parks, staff did not add them in the original draft. It was, from memory, it was a direction via a resolution from council to add them in. Staff simply implemented council's resolution as swiftly as it could. Noting that it was relatively low risk given that there was little to no implication from the decision because they were already Crown land parcels under the care and control of the town, so it wasn't particularly impactful. I'm not sure the same could be said for this area, given that we know that at the very least it's going to be coded residential R60. And depending on what the minister ultimately decides, hopefully before too long, it could be upwards of there. So again, probably going back to a previous comment I've made a few times, is in undertaking this body of work, whether it's before or with the precinct structure plan, we would do very well to understand what council's desired outcome is, as to whether we're simply seeking to replicate materials and colours, or whether it's actually a means of trying to stymie development that's otherwise being facilitated by the scheme. So once we understand that, we'd be in a better position to actually scope out the body of work.
So, just for clarity, sorry if I'm being a bit fuzzy here, but just for clarity, I'm not sure what density has to do with conserving and enhancing the cultural heritage, significance and character of an area. Because the density to me, either an area has heritage value or it doesn't. So I'm not entirely sure how the question of proposed density comes into play here, when really it should be an assessment of whether the area actually has density or not. Would that be a correct assumption?
Through the chair, in part, and I suppose going back to the 2018 body of work, that body of work that the town paid for recommends 4 properties in the precinct as being on the heritage survey, and does not recommend any of them being on the heritage list, and does not recommend a heritage area. So in terms of the statement, it's either got heritage value or it doesn't. The prevailing view based on the document the town procured 5 years ago is that it does not. That's not to say we can't review that, but in terms of the assertion that it's got heritage value or it doesn't, I think in the absence of any subsequent information, one has to assume that it does not. In terms of the comment about the interplay between the policy and the scheme, I don't disagree with the comment that they're somewhat different, but I think we need to sort of acknowledge some of the comments that have come through with the submissions and some of the comments made here tonight by members of the public that talk about vacant sites and redevelopment of those vacant sites. The redevelopment of those vacant sites will very much be a function of the density that they are going to be provided in the next 3 months. So I think there's, whilst they are separate, they are somewhat related, and it does appear to be a concern to at least some of the submitters.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. I understand and agree that there might be misconception in some areas. However, I think councillors are aware of the difference second, so I can read that out. Okay, so if I delete by the end of this financial year in point 3 and instead have request the CEO prepare a report to council on the heritage and character within the Nurstead Avenue precinct on the side, will delete the portion by the end of this financial year out of point 3.
Thank you, Mayor Hamilton. That will allow councillors to decide whether there's a seconder for Councillor Johns seeking to move the officer recommendation. So in terms of the officer recommendation and the potential amendment, both of which points 1 and 2 are identical. It's just point 3, which is that, I suppose, non-core to the work that's being performed by the administration. So if there is a seconder for the officers, Councillor Wilding.
Apologies, Deputy Mayor. I do have one last quick question, if you'll allow it.
Of course.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gibson, with regard to point 3, given that there is no time frame associated with it in the proposed amendment to the amendment, and this is a speculative question, is there much of a difference timeline-wise in terms of when such a heritage area would be considered between the officer's recommendation and the amendment?
Through the chair, if the term by the end of the financial year was removed, functionally, there's probably not a lot of difference. Like, I suppose the officer recommendation provides probably, I'd suggest, more certainty to the landowners, that they can be sure which process it attaches to, which is the precinct structure plan. Whereas number 3, with the removal of those sort of 6 or 7 words, largely leans towards the same, but without providing that certainty that it will be done as part of the precinct structure plan.
If I may,
Is this a follow-on from Councillor Wilding's question?
sorry, yes, if I may, that's deliberate on my part because I actually do not see this instruction plan as being a necessary element to the preparation of the heritage and character assessment of that area. So, for instance, if, just speculated, for instance, if there was a delay in because the development of the precinct structure plan, I would not see there need be a delay in the proposal for a heritage and character assessment for Nurstead Avenue. And the reason I say that is because there have been occasions in the past where projects have been delayed to another financial year. So that's my only separation of the items in that respect. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Hamilton. So councillors have heard the distinction as Mayor Hamilton sees it. If it is the case that we have a seconder for Councillor John moving the officer's recommendation, then it will be open to the Mayor to seek to move an amendment. So I take that as your seconding, Councillor Wilding?
Correct, Deputy Mayor.
Okay, we have a mover and a seconder. If there was anything that Director Gibson wanted to say or that's been covered, I might then allow Mayor Hamilton, who has indicated that she wishes to move an amendment, to ask the mover and the seconder whether they're happy to incorporate her amendment. Otherwise, we'll go to a vote as to whether that amendment should be incorporated.
Okay, well, yeah, fine, we'll go that process. A different point 3.
We're just taking instruction.
Yep, so, Mayor Hamilton brings forward her amendment now.
Yep, so Mayor Hamilton, you're putting forward your amendment, which is simply to substitute point 3 in the officer's recommendation for your amended point 3. So you're the mover for that. Do I have a seconder for Mayor Hamilton's proposed amendment? Councillor Carter, thank you. I missed the point where we can ask the mover and seconder whether they wish to accept the Mayor's amendment before we move to argument as to whether that should occur. Councillor John?
No, I don't accept it.
You don't accept it? Okay, thank you. We only need one of the mover and seconder to not accept it, so we move into debate on that item. Mayor Hamilton, you're seeking to move that amendment, so it is for you to open.
Well, okay, sorry. Because the recording is breaking up, I thought Councillor John said he refused the amendment.
Opposed to the amendment. He doesn't accept the amendment. To be included, yeah. So we have to move to a vote on that, so you need to convince council as to why that should be incorporated.
Okay. I'm a great believer in the fact that something either has heritage value or it does not. I don't believe it needs to be tied to other things like the precinct structure plan or, APS 11. I don't see any of those necessities of tying whether the precinct has heritage value or not to those items. My preference would be for this to be expedited in a very straightforward and simple way. I do not think it would be complicated. My estimation is that number 12 Nurstead up to the end of Earlsbury is the only section that may have heritage value, but I'm not consulted. It's only because I've walked the street, looked at the houses, actually been inside some of those houses. So congratulations to some of those residents who have done a marvellous job in restoring their properties. I believe that heritage properties have been added to the local survey, the local heritage survey in the past without a great deal of difficulty. I do know that we have a significant body of work already that has been done in the past. We have current heritage character, I can't remember the full name of it, that was done in 2018. Certainly the residents have a number of resources that they have presented. I think assessing the properties that might well go onto the heritage survey should be a relatively simple process. I think thereafter there could be an assessment of the area to see if it would be suitable for a heritage area. I note that there are already 4 of those properties that are on the heritage survey list, and another 4 applications have been made, possibly, apparently, one other as well that may be in the pipeline. Okay. That would add up to 8 properties in a very short street close to Earlsbury. It makes sense that these properties may well be a precinct of value. Many councillors on this council do not have the benefit of having been on council previously. I do know that when we were in this council, we were initially discussing Success Hill South, the issue of heritage in that area was raised by various councillors. I even recall the 2 councillors who voted against LPS 11 back in 2020 because they wanted heritage overlays on that area. So it's not a new thing that's being raised before this council. I would like to see this work done quickly. Thank you.
Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Acting Mayor. Very briefly, because we've been over and over this tonight, the important issue is this precinct structure plan could be as much as 2 years away. And it's a very simple matter to add to a local planning policy protection of this area. It doesn't seem to me to warrant such a hugely complicated approach. Now, as we know, it's been mentioned a couple of times tonight that it wasn't on the 2015 plan or 2018 plan or whatever. But we all know that these things, when you get to the minutiae and the details, things can be left off. They can be left off inadvertently. They can be left off because of information that wasn't available at the time comes up later. These things are not set in stone. This is why we always have our local heritage study every 2 years or every 5 years. You can correct me. But anyway, at regular intervals throughout our planning process. So I would say that it's a very simple little request that we do look at this. There doesn't seem to be anyone that I'm aware of on council or on the administration doesn't think or is dead against this happening. We all seem to want it to happen. So I don't think we should wait to the precinct structure plan. I think that is just pushing things out to the probably beyond our term on council. I'd like to see this added and cleared up fairly quickly. I don't think it'll be that much of a problem to do so. Thank you.
Councillor John.
Thank you. Well, I agree completely with what Madam Mayor has said about the heritage value of the area and those properties. That's not my reason for rejecting the amendment. My reason for rejecting the amendment is because if council is unhappy with the turnaround, they have levers that they can pull. Those involve KPIs for the CEO and should be a discussion with the CEO. I don't think it's appropriate for them to be making amendments with changing and micromanaging town staff in mind. That's something I've been learning as a councillor, so that's my reason for pushing back on this amendment, as I just don't think it's best practice for a council and a good decision.
Do I have another speaker in favour of the amendment? I'm happy to say something on that briefly. Having had the benefit of hearing from Director Gibson, in his view there isn't too much difference in the two approaches. I do take on board what Councillor Carter has said in that there is the potential for the precinct structure plan to take somewhat longer than the process which we've undertaken for Earls Ferry, which we may well take in relation to the remainder of Nurstead, if not a portion of it. So in that regard, I'm inclined to, on balance, favour the amendment, especially given that we have removed the specification as to the time in which that is to occur. But yeah, pretty closely run race for me. Given that I've spoken in favour of it, is there anyone that wishes to speak against it? If not, we'll turn to the vote. So all those in favour of incorporating Mayor Hamilton's amendment into the substantive, if you could please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6. Yes, thank you. So I have 6, so that is carried. So, incorporate into the substantive. So, Councillor John, if you wish to discuss the substantive motion. If there were anybody that wished to speak for or against the substantive, this is their opportunity. I think that's been pretty well traversed. So happy to put that to the vote. So this is the substantive motion with the Mayor's amendment. So that is Officer's recommendations point 1 and 2, Mayor's amendment being point 3, replacing the...
Can we get a reading on that so that we've got it correct?
Look, I'm happy to read that given the technology issues, unless Mayor Hamilton has a desire to read that. I'm happy to read that on her behalf.
I can read it.
Thank you.
Request preparation of a report to council on heritage and character within the Nurstead Avenue precinct, outlining possible expansion of the provisions contained in local planning policy 4-heritage and character that potentially identifies all or part of the Nurstead Avenue precinct as a heritage area.
have that on the record? Okay, so just confirming to councillors that, yes, so all councillors are reasonably happy, they understand what we're voting on. Excellent, so we'll proceed to the vote. Those in favour? And I take that as unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to item 12.3. On block. 12.4, it is. So that is the annual report. And that is the Office of the CEO, Mr. CEO.
Thank you, Chairman. The report is a statutory requirement. As Council would be aware, every year we are required to formally adopt this recommendation so we can meet some deadlines that aligns with the regulations, which will then flow on to an electors meeting early in the new year, which you've already set a date for. So tonight's role is for Council to adopt the annual report as written. I will admit there is some tidying up to do with the report, the Mayor's message, the CEO's message, and some of the graphics, but the text itself that has been advertised will not change. And the most important part of the report is obviously the financial reports, which were dealt with through the audit process and have been endorsed by the Audit and Governance Committee recently. So happy to take questions myself, or if it's a financial matter, Director White. But I think this is quite an easy matter, which happens every year.
No questions from councillors? Well, that item not drawing too much attention to itself, I'm happy to simply put that to the yes, mover Councillor Wilding, and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Burke. So we will vote on that. All those in favour of the office and recommendation? That is carried unanimously. Item 12.5, so the trees notice of motion. So this deals with a former notice of motion of council and how that will be implemented going forward. If the appropriate director wanted to speak to that item, that would be appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The notice of motion was put forward, and I must admit I'm not very familiar with it, having only stepped into this role very briefly. The notice of motion was put together by Director Phillips some time, and you no doubt the bulletins that have been provided council on the updates and the recommendations for those nominations.
Thank you. Councillors, do we have any questions regarding this item? Oh yes, thank you. Councillor Ames.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to ask some questions. Sorry for my voice. Just looking to seek some clarification in regards to how the planting of the specific species of trees along Lord Street will or may affect the future developments of Lord Street. Is there an opportunity that we can have any information regarding that, and how the planting of trees along Lord Street obviously will affect future works of that area?
I'm happy to assist if you like, Mr. Chairman. Myself and Director Gibson met with Main Roads WA earlier in the year to discuss this matter, and Director Adams was with us, and those proposed works are at least 20 years off. So what we're suggesting is that is enough time to deal with increasing tree canopy and shade, given that we will at least have 20, if not potentially 30 or 40 years out of the particular species we are planting.
Thank you for that, Cameron. So just a follow-up question for that. I would like to maybe state the issue, or maybe this is not the case, that those discussions have taken into consideration where the new trees will be planted in the future-minded opportunity that there will be minimal disruption to the tree canopy if and when the redevelopment of Lord Street becomes apparent.
Everybody's looking at everybody else, Councillor Ames. Look, it's probably too hard to answer because we don't have a design, and to do a design you need to spend a considerable amount of money. So I trust Mr Adams has done his best to put trees where they offer immediate need now, rather than whether something may or may not happen in the future. But we are not talking a great number of trees. So I think with everything, a tree has a life. Progress goes on, so a bit of loss of tree canopy here just means we might need to plant a few more trees somewhere else.
Yeah, I totally understand that, Mr Woods. I would hate for us as a current council to not think of the future mindset of lovely.
Yeah, look, we concur too, but perhaps the time for that conversation was when the notice of motion was actually passed by council. Those considerations probably should have been taken into account then, and those things could have been put in place.
Mayor Hamilton.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
You may.
As opposed to the three native varieties that have been listed. In my mind is London plane trees, because they are used by many local governments in high traffic polluted areas, because they tend to thrive and last a lot better, and they are very fast growing, providing canopy cover within 5 years. So just wondering about the scope. I do understand that Mr Phil Adams has done a lot of work on this, and I applaud the staff doing that. But if we have only got a 20-year timeline, I'm wondering whether there's any scope to look at something that's fast growing and what's been put in the report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I believe Director Davey has a comment to make on that.
Thank you, and through the chair. So the species selection has been based on the available verge space. So the verge width along Lord Street is medium, and the depth is also quite small. Some areas there's only 3 metres between the property boundary and the footpath. So the species of tree would be suited to that verge width, which would avoid issues or minimise issues with root and branch encroachment into private property, and also the requirement to prune the trees for sightline reasons. Also, another potential issue with the London plane trees is that they're a host species for the polyphagous shot-hole borer, and they're not recommended for planting by the Water Corporation. So they're one of the species that they don't recommend for a street tree for new tree planting.
Okay. 4 trees in Guildford then. So thank you. I just a great admirer of the avenue of trees outside Guildford Grammar. So anyway.
I have a question I might add. In terms of the planting along Lord Street, are we planting with a view to those trees being removed in 20 years' time when the road is projected to be expanded?
Thank you, through you. We don't have the designs, and the majority of the road widening will be on the eastern side. However, there is a chance that when they're undertaking the work, they'll need to undertake works from, property boundary to property boundary. So there is a chance they will need to be removed when the road's upgraded.
And that would extend to the 3 species which have been identified as being suitable, and if so, are there other species which we might be able to plant which would avoid that fate?
Yes, it would include those 3 species, but I don't think changing the species selection would affect that. It would be more the placement, just due to the narrow width. There's a limited location where you can place them on the verge.
So if we were to plant those particular species, there is a chance that through the road widening we could retain those trees, because obviously we'd like to have 20 years growth and not lose that. We'd like to continue on.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that would be correct.
Councillor Carter.
I'd just like to make a comment on that, that we've already lost about 30 years that we could have had trees planted there, nothing has happened. We're saying another 20 years at the minimum. Is probably going to be a lot more than that, because I know that there are plans to look at, God, I've forgotten the name of the road. The one that runs off to Morley. Morley Drive. So, yes, and so I know that there's plans to move something across the river there. That's also on the books and has been for some time. So I don't think we should make plans now when we urgently need to build our canopy on something that may or may not happen within the next 20, 30, 40, maybe even 50 years.
Just had a question perhaps for the CEO. In terms of the process, obviously we're having a discussion in relation to the trees or the kind of trees that might be planted there. Is the notice of motion drafted in such a way that it doesn't lock council nor the administration into a particular tree, and that discussion might be had through a different forum, that once it is decided that trees of a particular size are to be planted there, and I suppose subject to availability, that neither council nor administration would be locked into a particular tree, and that could be changed as things evolve?
Through the chair, so part 4 of the previous resolution doesn't mention a species. It just says that to prioritise the planting of shade trees where space allows along the eastern side of Lord Street and the western section north of Walter Road East upon completion of the undergrounding of existing power lines in the section of this road. And then part 3 also refers to shade trees using a fast-growing large crown, preferably non-deciduous species. And the London plane tree is a deciduous species, so that would actually contradict the previous resolution of council.
But in that regard, I mean, the officer's recommendation, I think point 3, we're accepting plans and costings for the realigned path west side of Lord Street, and talks about the path, and adopts the proposed tree species and winter 2024 planting program as per attachment 4. Does that lock us into a particular species? Or does that give sufficient flexibility?
Through you, Chair, the way I understand it, it locks us into those recommended plantings because of the need to reduce traffic management costs and additional cost to ratepayers for maintenance.
And in terms of the purchase of those trees, that's something which would have to happen in the next few months?
Yes, it will be happening by January.
Okay, thank you. Did anyone else have any further questions? None online. Mayor Hamilton.
Just seeking a little bit of clarity. My understanding from previous discussions with Mr. Adams was that the proposed plantings on the western side of Lord Street would possibly be retained in the long term, whereas the eastern side is the side that Main Roads has been purchasing land to expand the road. Is that a correct assessment of the situation with Lord Street?
Through the chair, broadly that's correct. The other regional road designation under the Metropolitan Region Scheme aligns with the west side of Lord Street, with the widening, as you suggest, Madam Mayor, occurring on the east side. Broadly, what you're saying is correct. The widening is happening on the right hand side as you're travelling north. Whether that necessarily equates to any retention of those trees as part of a major road upgrading project, that remains to be seen. And I suggest, even though the widening is occurring on the eastern side, we probably shouldn't assume necessarily that all the trees on the western side would therefore be retained.
Okay, just on another point, I note that the power poles, lighting poles that have been installed for underground power are all on the western side of Lord Street, and they are all remarkably close to the road. So, again, my assumption is if Main Roads were expanding into the western verge space, there'd be a lot of power poles that need to be removed as well. Would that be correct?
Through the chair? Yes, that would be.
Very expensive then. Okay, thank you.
All right, if there are no further questions, I would invite somebody to move the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Councillor Carter. Do I have a seconder? Councillor John. Was there anybody that wished to speak against this item? That being so, happy to put this one to the vote. So all of those in favour of the officer's recommendation for item 12.5, please raise your hand. Councillor Ames, are you for or against? There we go.
Sorry, Chair, I had a bit of a technical challenge. I am for the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. That makes that unanimous. Moving on to item 12.8, which is the calendar of meetings for 2024. I understand that the Mayor had some amendments, but in the first instance I'll allow the CEO to speak to this item.
In the interest of time, Mr Chair, I'm quite happy to proceed straight to the proposed amended motion by the Mayor.
Thank you.
Can I just seek one piece of clarity before we move that through you, Mr Deputy Mayor? The attachment, I referred to the attachment on the briefing session and the attachment that was forwarded by email, as I believe that the attachments that are in the OCM documents is incorrect. That's still being
It's been updated on the website. We couldn't get it through to doc. Yeah.
The public document on the website is correct.
Yeah, but not to councillors.
Okay, so it's the same as the one last week in the briefing?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm happy to move the amendment that I put forward with several amendments in there. I think all of them in front of you. I don't know if the grounds to.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll take that as you moving that item as amended. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Burke. Unless there's anybody that wishes to speak against that, I'm happy to put that to the vote. So all those in favour of item 12.8 amended as per the Mayor's amendment, And that is unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to item 12.10. It's open. Yeah. Disposal of 14 Iverson Place. I might turn that to the appropriate director to give us an exposition on that item.
Through the chair, nothing further to add to last week.
Unless council had any questions relating to that, I'm happy to seek a mover. Councillor John, the seconder. Councillor Burke. Anybody wish to say anything for or against that? Right, happy to put that to the vote. All those in favour of moving the officer's recommendation for item 12.10, please raise your hand. Yep. And that is unanimous. Item 12.11, Bassendean Oval Lighting. Is there anything further that any officer wishes to add in relation to that?
Through you, Mr Deputy Mayor, no, nothing to add to last week. Thank you.
And were there any questions that councillors had? None online either. I'll seek a mover for item 12.11. Councillor Wilding, a seconder. Councillor Burke. Anyone wish to say anything about this item? Put that to the vote. All in favour, please raise your hand. That's unanimous again. Thank you. Item 12.12. So, additional funding for drainage project at Jubilee Reserve. Is there anything which any officer wishes to add to the item as written?
No, Mr Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? I will seek a mover. Who would like to move that? Councillor Wilding, seconder. Councillor Carter. Anybody for or against? Excellent. Well, nobody against. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour of the officer's recommendation. That is, again, unanimous. So that concludes the officers' reports. We have motions of which previous notice has been given. So we have a motion 13.1, which is Mayor Hamilton's notice of motion, exploration of opportunities for co-location at 48 to 50 Old Perth Road. Mayor Hamilton, would you like to speak to the notice of motion that you've put forward?
I think it's pretty self-explanatory. It's requesting the CEO to put feelers out to ascertain if there are parties interested in co-locating to potential new facilities that we might potentially eventually build in this town. One knows that our civic facilities within town are very dilapidated. They're also spread over several sites. Whilst this continues, we have not as much efficiency as we would like. The aspiration would be to locate all the civic facilities into one site, maybe a multi-storey site, whatever. And if there's co-located entities in that building as well, it would make for greater efficiencies, potentially reduce development costs, but also the ultimate aim would be to free up other sites that are occupied by town staff that in turn could be developed into mixed use and residential developments. So there are pluses all the way along. This is the very beginning of the process, opening the door, for lack of a better word. And we rely on our CEO to make those investigations on our behalf and to come back with information. So
I have a question on that one. Items 1 and 2, happy with those. They seem eminently sensible. Item 3, is what's proposed there that rather than seeking opportunities, that once those opportunities have been identified, that the CEO would negotiate a memorandum of understanding, and if so, is that intended to be a binding memorandum of understanding?
My understanding is MOUs are not binding, but in any case, the CEO, as it states there, would need to bring them back to council for formal presentation to council. But I think that if we are going to be seen as being determined to progress matters, we need to provide a little bit of freedom to the CEO to negotiate with other parties. But ultimately, in the end, this council has the authority to approve or not MOUs. But my understanding is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the MOUs tend to be non-binding until further. It's merely a memorandum of understanding, and then that leads to more concrete contracts into the future. Would that be a correct assessment?
Well, in my view, I see that as the title to a document, and you'd always have regard to the terms to determine what it actually does. Some people might take a view that it does set you on a particular course, whereas others might make it non-binding. So I suppose if we had the inclusion of the word non-binding, but then if a memorandum of understanding is non-binding, it's of fairly limited utility in that either party can walk away. I might seek from the CEO, I suppose, some clarity as to what guidance, if any, he would like to see in that part of the notice of motion, Mr. CEO.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. The way I read it is that a state government department would not be entertained by an MOU in any case. So it really relates to the potential of an MOU being drafted with a potential not-for-profit or a for-profit private operator, rather than government, Department of Finance, for instance. The fact that it's in there doesn't mean to say it'll be used. So I've got the authorisation to negotiate an MOU, but as the Mayor said, it's subject to council adoption. So in reality, I'm not sure it'll actually be used. I think in a good relationship, if there are ongoing arrangements and engagements and conversations, those updates to councillors in a more formal setting would give me some guidance to execute an MOU that may be more binding. So I don't think we need to worry about it right now. I think the fact that it's in there doesn't negate from the outcome. Do I think it'll be used? Probably not, but I don't see any harm in the way it's written.
Excellent, thank you. Were there any questions from other councillors? So we have a mover in Mayor Hamilton. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Wilding. Was there anybody that wished to speak against this item? Thank you. There being no one wishing to speak against, I will put that to the vote. So all those in favour of Mayor Hamilton's notice of motion, please raise your hand. That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to item 14, announcement of notices of motion for the next meeting. Happy to receive any from the floor if councillors have them. There are none. Urgent business, Mr. CEO.
None at this stage, thank you.
Confidential business.
Nil.
And closure. That brings the meeting to a close at 7 minutes past 8. Thank you all for your attendance.
Very good chairing.